The Eden Protocol. Chapter: Dust, Blood, and Ruin. Ravinar was a hard world. The kind of planet where the horizon always looked tired. Pale dust storms roamed the empty flats like wandering beasts, swallowing the sun for hours at a time. Most settlers believed the planet didn't want them there. It tolerated them only because it had no strength left to push them out. Even so, people came. Families desperate for land, for freedom, for a life not dictated by distant empires or corporate crowns. Taren lived with his parents on the Holt homestead, a patch of land carved into the stony soil north of the Spineback Mountains. The farm wasn't much. An old prefab cabin bolted to a ferrocrete foundation, a generator shed half buried in the earth, grow racks humming inside a sealed greenhouse dome. Out in the fields, a pair of drone plows traced slow, patient paths through the stubborn soil. Life was harsh, but they managed. His father always said the world rewarded stubborn people. Taren believed him, until the night that stubbornness wasn't enough. The day had been ordinary, a tight harvest from the vertical grow racks, repairs to a cracked condenser pipe, and dinner around the small, heat-scarred table. Taren had been thinking about the far-off towns he'd never visited, places he'd only heard about from traders passing through with battered sand, skimmers and half-truths, towns where lights stayed on all night and where the smell of cooked food wasn't just algae and nutrient brick. He'd never see those towns with his parents. The attack came after dusk, when the planet's 2 moons hung low, casting faint blue shadows across the farm. Taren woke to the sharp clang of metal striking metal. His father shouted something, urgent, panicked. Then came the sound of the generator whining, a pitch Taren had never heard before. It cut out suddenly, plunging the homestead into silence. Taren scrambled out of his cot. His mother grabbed him by the shoulders before he could reach the door. "Listen to me," she whispered, her voice tight with fear she was trying to suppress. "You run! If anything happens, you run to the mountains! Understand?" He didn't understand, but he nodded. He always nodded when she used that voice. Through the cracks of the window shutters he saw them. Figures in dust cloaks riding low, slung skimmers. The engines growling with predatory hunger. Raiders. Pirates. The kind of men who saw isolated farms as easy prey. The kind the frontier whispered about, but rarely survived. His father rushed past with an old pulse rifle, second-hand, unreliable, but better than nothing. He took position by the door, already breathing hard. "They cut power," his father said. "They've got a jammer on them. We can't call for help." His mother pushed a small pack into Taren's hands. "Go!" A blast shook the cabin, the front wall dented inward, buckling. Raiders shouted outside, their voices sharp and gleeful. Something heavy slammed into the greenhouse dome. Taren heard glass shatter, the delicate sound swallowed by the howling of the wind. His father fired through the door. 1 shot, maybe 2. Return fire tore through the wall in sizzling arcs. His mother shoved Taren toward the back exit, her hands trembling. The next seconds happened too fast to understand. A flash of light. A scream that might have been his father's. His mother pushing him harder, her last words a desperate whisper. Run! He ran. He sprinted across the field, the dust cold on his bare feet. Behind him, flames rose as the raiders torched the grow racks. Drone plows toppled. Machinery exploded. The night filled with smoke and red light. Taren didn't look back. He reached the foothills by dawn, stumbling and shaking, his throat raw from running and crying. The mountains loomed ahead, gray, cracked, carved by time. His parents had always warned him never to wander alone there, but warnings didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except getting as far from the raiders as possible. For hours he climbed. His legs burned, his stomach cramped with hunger. His lungs struggled to breathe the thin mountain air. By noon, he was delirious, stumbling over rocks and scraping his palms bloody. The raiders didn't chase him. Why would they? To them, he was a scared boy with nothing worth taking. But the mountains didn't care about raiders. The mountains had their own dangers. By sunset, he felt the world spinning around him. When he reached a narrow ledge, he misstepped. The rock crumbled beneath his foot. He flailed for balance, grasping at nothing. The ground gave way. He fell. The world became dust and wind and pain. He crashed through a thin crust of stone into darkness. Something metal groaned beneath him, a sharp alien sound, and the fall stopped suddenly, jarring his entire body. He lay there in a cold cavern, unable to breathe for a moment. Slowly, he pushed himself up. Faint lights, soft white and pulsing like breathing, glowed along the walls. Lines traced geometric patterns, too clean and perfect to be natural. The air smelled of ozone and old machines. Behind him, the broken shaft he'd fallen through was a jagged circle high above, a fading sliver of night sky. Too high to climb. He was trapped. But the cavern wasn't empty. The lights along the walls brightened. A deep hum vibrated underfoot, steady and ancient. A door slid open with a whisper that sounded more alive than mechanical. Taren stumbled back, terrified. A voice emerged from the darkness beyond, smooth, resonant, and impossibly calm. Designation, Taren. Biological signature confirmed. Protocol gatekeeper awakened. Welcome, Heir candidate. You are in no danger. Taren froze. No human had built this place. The voice continued with patient certainty, as if it had waited centuries just to speak to him. Do not be afraid. You have been expected. The lights flared to full brilliance, revealing a corridor stretching far into the earth. Polished metal, glowing panels, and symbols he didn't recognize. Taren took a single trembling breath. Whatever this place was, whatever this voice was, it was waiting for him, and it had just called him Heir. Chapter: The Base of the Forgotten Sovereigns. The transition from the freezing, wind-whipped mountain air to the interior of the base was a physical shock. The air here was pressurized, scrubbed of the fine Ravinar dust that usually coated Taren's lungs, and smelled faintly of ozone and sterile minerals. As the heavy iris door hissed shut behind him, the roar of the outside world vanished, replaced by a low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate in his very marrow. Taren collapsed against the smooth, matte silver wall. His hands were shredded from the climb, his clothes scorched by the farm fire, and his mind was a fractured mess of grief and terror. Medical trauma detected, the voice said. It didn't come from a speaker. It seemed to emanate from the air itself. Subject, Taren. Age, standard years. Status, critical exhaustion. Grade, lacerations. Localized cellular dehydration. Initiating recovery protocol. Before Taren could scramble away, the floor beneath him shifted. A section of the seamless metal rose like a liquid, forming a soft, ergonomic cradle that caught him as he slumped. A pale blue light swept over his body, a scanner that felt like a warm comb passing through his skin. "Who are you?" Taren rasped, his voice cracking. "Where am I?" "You are in Sanctum 4, a deep-crust repository of the sovereign hegemony," the voice replied. A holographic projection shimmered into existence in the center of the room. It wasn't a person, but a complex geometric shape, a dodecahedron of shifting light that pulsed in sync with the voice. "I am SOVR9, the custodian intelligence. I have maintained this facility for 12 years, awaiting a biological signature that matches the Warden potential criteria." "I don't know what that is," Taren sobbed, the weight of his parents' deaths finally breaking through his shock. "I just want to go home, but there's no home left." The data scans of the surface indicate a high thermal event at your previous coordinates, Silver said, its tone devoid of pity, but layered with a strange logical resonance. The hegemony fell because it could not protect its fringes from the chaos of entropy. You are a product of that chaos, but you possess the genetic markers of the architects, the ones who built the stars. You are not merely a settler, Taren. You are a legacy. A small, spider-like drone detached from the ceiling. It moved with terrifying fluid grace, hovering inches from Taren's face. He flinched, but the drone didn't strike. Instead, it emitted a fine mist that smelled of mint and chemicals. As the mist touched his wounds, the pain vanished instantly, replaced by a cooling numbness. Sleep, the AI commanded. The education of a sovereign cannot begin while the vessel is broken. Taren slept for what felt like days. When he finally awoke, he was no longer in the entry chamber. He was in a vast living quarter that looked like a cathedral made of glass and light. A window, or what looked like one, showed the jagged peaks of the mountains outside, but the data overlays on the glass tracked wind speeds, mineral compositions, and even the heat signatures of radar skimmers miles away on the plains. You have recovered 94% of your physical baseline, Sovar announced. We shall begin. The sovereigns did not rule through strength alone, but through the mastery of the fundamental laws. To lead this quadrant, you must understand the atom, the gene, and the vacuum. The training was relentless. For the first year, Taren did little but study. The AI didn't use books. It used direct neural interface chairs that fed information into his visual cortex. He learned the hard physics of Ravinar, why the soil was alkaline, how the magnetosphere could be harnessed for power, and the exact chemical composition of the Eden seeds stored in the lower vaults. He learned that the small empires currently squabbling over the galaxy were like children playing in the ruins of a palace. The sovereigns had moved planets. They had folded space, and they had left this base as a seed, waiting for someone with the right mind to plant it. By the second year, the training turned physical. A ruler who cannot defend his people is merely a target, Sovur told him. The AI opened the armory. It wasn't filled with the clunky, overheating pulse rifles the settlers used. It held vibration blades that could shear through tank armor and kinetic shield bracers that could stop a railgun slug. Taren spent hours every day in the combat simulators, fighting holographic raiders that were faster and smarter than the men who had killed his parents. He grew taller. His frame, once spindly from frontier malnutrition, became lean and powerful, fueled by the nutrient-dense synthesized meals the base provided. His eyes, once wide with fear, became sharp and calculating. He spent his evenings watching the long-range sensors, tracking the raider bands on the surface. He saw them burn other farms. He saw the Wild West lawlessness of the planet, and his jaw tightened. "Why don't we go out there now?" Taren asked one evening, standing over a tactical map of the Northern Territories. "I could stop them. With one of those drones, I could wipe them out." "You are thinking like a bandit, not a sovereign," Silver replied. "To kill a man is easy. To build a world where that man never felt the need to kill is the work of a ruler. You are not ready. You have mastered the sword, but you have not yet mastered the heart. You are still driven by vengeance." "They killed my mother," Taren snapped. "And if you kill them, their sons will come for you," the AI countered. "The cycle of the frontier is a circle of blood. We are here to break the circle. You will leave when you understand that the greatest weapon in this base is not the warship in the hangar. It is the knowledge of how to make the desert bloom." Taren stayed. He studied the terraforming logs. He learned how to manipulate the weather. He learned the history of 1,000 fallen civilizations, seeing the same patterns of greed and collapse repeat across the stars. By the time he was 18, Taren Holt was no longer the boy who had fallen into a pit. He was a polymath, a warrior, and a scientist. He wore a simple, dark gray sovereign undersuit that felt like a second skin, capable of regulating his temperature and protecting him from radiation. "The training is complete," Silver said, on the morning of his 19th year. "The base will remain linked to your neural signature. I will be in your ear, but the choices will be yours. You must go into the world as a man, not a ghost. Find those who are lost. Build a foundation. Only then will the final seals of the hegemony be broken." Taren stood at the exit iris. He looked back at the glowing halls that had raised him. "I'll be back," Taren promised. "I know," the AI replied. "I have already calculated the probability. It is 100%. The door opened, and the harsh, dusty wind of Ravinar hit him. Taren stepped out, squinting against the suns. He didn't look like a king yet. He looked like just another traveler in a battered cloak. But as he began the long walk down the mountain toward the village of Redwater, the ground seemed to tremble slightly beneath his boots, as if the planet itself knew that its master had finally arrived. Chapter: The Girl from the Dust Road. The village of Redwater was a scar on the landscape, a collection of rusted, corrugated metal shacks huddled around a deep-bore well that produced more silt than water. It was a place of desperate faces and dry coughs, situated at the crossroads of two major trade tracks. To the raiders, it was a convenient place to shake down travelers. To the settlers, it was a last resort. Taren entered the village at midday, his sovereign undersuit hidden beneath a tattered, dust-stained poncho. He looked like just another drifter, but his stride was different, measured, balanced, and silent. In his mind, a faint, sub-vocal hum connected him to the mountain base. "Atmospheric toxicity is 12% above safety margins," Silver Nine's voice whispered directly into his auditory nerve. "The local filtration system is failing. Estimated collapse. 3 weeks." Taren ignored the voice for a moment, his eyes scanning the saloon, a repurposed cargo container where men drank fermented cactus juice and traded stories of survival. Near the edge of the village, by a line of stalled, overheating sand crawlers, he saw her. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands buried in the guts of a massive atmospheric condenser. She looked barely older than him, with grease-streaked cheeks and hair the color of sun-bleached straw tied back with a strip of industrial wire. A group of older men stood over her, jeering. "Give it up, Lyra," one of them spat, kicking the side of the machine. "The core is cracked. We're moving out tomorrow. If the well doesn't give us water, we'll just have to raid the next town over for it." The girl, Lyra, didn't look up. Her voice was steady, though edged with exhaustion. "If you raid, you'll get shot. If I fix this, we drink. Go away, Harlan." The man reached down to grab her shoulder, but his hand stopped midair. Taren had moved without a sound, his fingers wrapped around Harlan's wrist. He didn't squeeze hard, but he applied pressure to a specific nerve cluster Silver had taught him years ago. Harlan yelped, his arm going limp. "Who the hell are you?" "A traveler," Taren said, his voice calm and resonant. "The girl is right. The core isn't cracked. The magnetic alignment is just off-center because your intake valves are choked with silicate." The men laughed, but it was nervous laughter. There was something in Taren's eyes, a cold, predatory intelligence that didn't belong on a drifter. They backed off, muttering threats about seeing him later at the saloon. Lyra finally looked up, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a greasy hand. Her eyes were a piercing, intelligent green. "I didn't need your help," she said, though she didn't sound angry. "But you're wrong. I've checked the alignment. It's the logic board. It's fried, and we don't have spares for 300 miles. Taren knelt beside her. "It's not the board. It's the interface." He reached into his poncho and pulled out a small silver tool, a sovereign resonance tuner. He pressed it against the machine's casing. A low, melodic chime echoed through the metal, inside the machine. The sound of grinding gears smoothed into a rhythmic hum. The coughing vibration stopped. A moment later, clear, cold water began to trickle into the collection basin. Lyra stared at the water, then at Taren. "What did you just do?" "I reminded it how to work," Taren said. Over the next week, Taren became a fixture in Redwater. He didn't ask for money. He asked for a place to sleep and a share of the rations. He worked alongside Lyra, repairing the village's crumbling infrastructure. He fixed the power grid using copper wire and sovereign-derived geometric layouts that maximized conductivity. He showed the farmers how to rotate their meager crops to avoid nitrogen depletion. Lyra was his shadow. She was homeless, a survivor of a colony collapse further south, living in the back of a broken-down hauler. She was cynical, tough, and possessed a natural brilliance for mechanics that reminded Taren of the sovereign engineers he'd studied. "You're not from around here," she said one night, as they sat on the roof of the hauler, watching the moons rise. "You talk like a scholar, you fight like a ghost, and you have tools that shouldn't exist. Why are you helping us?" "Because someone has to start," Taren said, looking toward the mountains. "The empires don't care about Ravinar. The raiders only care about what they can break. If we don't build something ourselves, we'll all end up like the dust." Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. "People are scared, Taren. They think you're a wizard or a spy, but the kids, they follow you like you're a god." It was true. A group of 5 orphans, the oldest no more than 12, had begun trailing Taren everywhere. They were the dust rats, children whose parents had been taken by the same raiders who killed Taren's family. They had no homes, no food, and no future. Taren saw himself in them. He saw the same hollow look in their eyes he'd had when he fell into the pit. The peace of Redwater was shattered on the 8th day. A scout on a ridge signaled. A raider war party was approaching, led by a man known as Vane, a butcher who used a modified mining mech to level settlements that refused to pay protection. The village panicked. Harlan and the other men began loading their crawlers to flee, abandoning the old and the weak. "We can't stay!" Lyra shouted, grabbing Taren's arm. "Vane has a mech. We have rusted rifles and hope. We have to run." "No," Taren said. He looked at the 5 children huddling behind Lyra. He looked at the water condenser he had fixed. "If we run, they'll just burn it all. We stop them here." "How?" Taren reached out and took Lyra's hand. It was the first time he'd touched her without a tool between them. "I have a place. A safe place. But I need you to trust me. I need you to lead them." "Lead who?" "The ones who want to live. The ones who want to learn." Taren turned to the orphans. "Do you want to keep hiding in the dirt? Or do you want to learn how to build a world where no one can ever hurt you again?" The oldest boy, a skinny kid named Jack, stepped forward. "I want to fight. I'll teach you something better than fighting," Taren promised. "I'll teach you how to win." As the dust clouds of the raider mechs appeared on the horizon, Taren led Lyra and the children toward the hidden pass in the Spineback Mountains. He wasn't just a traveler anymore. He was a recruiter. As they climbed, Lyra looked back at the village, then at Taren's determined profile. In the harsh light of the setting suns, she realized she wasn't just following a man into the mountains. She was following a vision. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the dark. Candidate Taren, Sovar Nine's voice, echoed in his mind as they reached the entrance to the pit. "I have prepared the secondary dormitories. The new tribe protocol is now active. Welcome home." Chapter: Rise of the New Tribe. The transition from the starving streets of Redwater to the gleaming corridors of Sanctum was, for Lyra and the children, like stepping into a dream or a haunting. As the iris door sealed behind them, The 5 orphans huddled together, their eyes wide as they stared at the self-illuminating walls and the floating geometric form of Sover 9. "To Taren," Lyra whispered, her hand tightening on his arm. "What is this? This isn't just a bunker. This is impossible." "It's an inheritance," Taren said, his voice echoing with a new authority. "Sover 9, initiate the acolyte orientation. These are the first of the new tribe." The years that followed were a blur of transformation. Under Taren's leadership and the AI's cold, efficient tutelage, the mountain base became a hive of activity. The children, Jax, Kale, Miri, and the others, were no longer dust rats. They were the first generation of sovereign-trained specialists. Jax showed a terrifying aptitude for tactical systems, spending his days in the combat simulators until his movements mirrored Taren's own lethal grace. Miri became a master of the biolabs, learning how to splice the ancient sovereign Eden seeds with local flora to create crops that could survive a vacuum. Lyra, however, became Taren's true partner. She took to the sovereign engineering archives like she had been born for them, eventually managing the base's complex power distribution and manufacturing arrays. But as they grew, so did the threat outside. Vane, the raider captain who had leveled Redwater after Taren's departure, had grown into a warlord. He had united the disparate bandit clans under a single banner, the Iron Skulls. They had salvaged more than just mining mechs. They had found a cache of old Empire orbital debris, missile pods, and heavy plating. They were no longer just pirates. They were an army, and they were moving toward the mountain passes, sensing that something valuable was hidden in the Spinebacks. "They're 3 days out," Jax reported, standing over a holographic tactical display in the command center. He was now 20, broad-shouldered and scarred from training. "Vane has 4 heavy mechs and over 100 skimmers. If they find the entrance, they'll just starve us out." Taren stood at the head of the table, his sovereign undersuit now augmented with a matte black chestplate and a flowing, reinforced cloak. "They won't find the entrance, because we aren't going to be here when they arrive." "Taren," Lyra said, her brow furrowed, "we're not ready for a full-scale war. The kids, the younger ones, they can't fight an army." "They won't have to," Taren said. He looked up at the ceiling. "Sovar 9. The final seal. Is the vessel flight ready?" The AI's voice was solemn. "The Aurelian has reached 98% systems integration. The gravitic drive is stable. However, Candidate Taren, once the ship leaves the hangar, the hegemony's presence on Ravinar will be visible to any orbital sensors in the quadrant. You will be declaring yourself a sovereign." "Open the hangar," Taren commanded. The floor of the central plaza began to vibrate. A massive seam appeared in the mountain's interior, and the ground split apart. From the darkness below, a ship rose on a cushion of shimmering blue light. It was unlike anything the settlers had ever seen. It wasn't a boxy, bolted-together freighter. It was a needle-thin shard of obsidian and gold, 300 meters long, with wings that looked like frozen lightning. The Aurelian, a sovereign light warship. "Lyra, take the engineering crew to the drive core," Taren ordered. "Jax, man the kinetic batteries. We're going to show Vane that the frontier is no longer his." The battle for the Spineback Pass began at dawn. Vane's army was a chaotic swarm of dust and smoke, their mechs stomping through the shale, firing haphazardly at the mountain walls. Vane sat in the cockpit of his lead mech, a towering 4-legged monstrosity, laughing over the open radio channels. "Come out, little wizard." Vane's voice crackled over the village frequencies. "We know you're in there. Give us the tech, and I'll let the girl live." The response didn't come over the radio. It came from the sky. The clouds above the mountain parted as the Aurelian descended, its hull glowing with the heat of atmospheric friction. It didn't make a sound. No roar of engines, just a low, terrifying hum that made the raiders' teeth ache. "Huh, what is that?" A raider screamed over the comms. Is that an Empire ship? Target the lead mech, Taren said, sitting in the command chair. His mind linked directly to the ship's sensors. The Aurelian didn't fire a missile. It fired a focused beam of coherent gravity. The ground beneath Vane's lead mech simply ceased to exist. The Earth collapsed into a perfect 20-meter-deep crater. The massive machine toppled forward, its legs snapping like dry twigs. The rest of the iron skulls panicked. They turned their scrap cannons toward the sky, but the Aurelian was too fast. It danced through the air, its kinetic shields absorbing their fire like rain on a window. "Jax, disable their skimmers! Non-lethal where possible," Taren commanded. "We need them to see. We need them to tell the story." Blue bolts of ion energy rained down, shorting out the engines of the raider vehicles. Within minutes, the army was a collection of smoking wrecks and terrified men fleeing into the desert on foot. Taren landed the ship in the center of the pass, the massive boarding ramp lowering with a hiss. He stepped out, followed by Lyra and his armored followers. Vane, bloodied and crawling from the wreckage of his mech, looked up in horror. "Who are you?" Vane wheezed, clutching a broken arm. "What empire do you serve?" Taren stood over him, the sons of Ravinar catching the gold filigree of his armor. He didn't look angry. He looked like a judge. "I serve no empire," Taren said, his voice amplified by the ship's external speakers, so every fleeing raider could hear it. "And I am not a wizard. My name is Taren. I am the warden of this world. The age of the bandit is over. The age of the sovereign has begun." He didn't kill Vane. He left him in the dust with enough water for 3 days and a choice: die in the desert or walk to the nearest town and tell them that the mountains were no longer empty. As the Aurelian rose back into the sky, Lyra stood beside Taren on the bridge. She looked down at the barren, brown world below. "They'll come for us now, won't they?" she asked. "The empires, the traitors, everyone." "Let them come," Taren said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "By the time they get here, this won't be a desert anymore. Silver 9, initiate the Eden Protocol. It's time to wake up the planet." Chapter: The Eden Maker. The transformation of Ravinar did not happen with a single flash of light, but through a calculated rhythmic pulse of ancient science. From the peaks of the Spineback Mountains, Taren watched as the Aurelian and a fleet of smaller automated sovereign drones began the atmospheric stitching. They wove silver trails through the upper ionosphere, deploying billions of sub-molecular processors that began to break down the toxic silicates in the air and stabilize the erratic weather patterns. Below, on the surface, the new tribe led the way. Jax and his security teams didn't just patrol, they built. They used sovereign nanoassemblers to construct life hubs at every major wellspring. Muri's biolabs released the first wave of engineered mosses, hardy purple-veined flora that thrived on alkaline soil and pumped oxygen into the thinning atmosphere. Within 5 years, the dust world was a memory. The brown plains had turned to a deep, vibrant teal as the sovereign grasses took hold. Rain, real sweet water, fell from skies that were now a brilliant, clear sapphire rather than a hazy orange. The news of the miracle of Ravinar spread through the quadrant like a solar flare. The small galactic empires, the Kordax hegemony and the United Rim systems, sent emissaries, their sleek, predatory cruisers hovering cautiously in high orbit. They came expecting to find a lucky scavenger to bully. They found a planetary defense grid that locked onto their warp cores the moment they entered the system. Taren received them not in a throne room, but in the center of a flourishing forest that had once been the site of his parents' destroyed farm. "We do not seek war," Taren told the Kordax ambassador, a man draped in heavy silks and arrogance. "But Ravinar is no longer a graveyard for your cast-offs. We are a sovereign world. If you come to trade, the gates are open. If you come to conquer, you will find that the sovereigns left more than just seeds in these mountains. The ambassador looked at the lush greenery, then at the disciplined, highly educated young men and women standing behind Taren, the orphans who were now engineers, pilots, and diplomats. He bowed his head. He had no choice. As the empires retreated to negotiate terms of recognition, the people of Ravinar gathered at the base of the Spinebacks. Thousands of settlers, former raiders who had laid down their arms, and new immigrants from the rim stood in the cool, fragrant air. Lyra stood at Taren's side. She was no longer the grease-stained girl from the dust road. She was the chief architect of the new tribe, her mind a living library of sovereign technology. She looked out at the crowd, then up at Taren. "They're waiting," she whispered, her hand finding his. "They want a king, Taren. They want someone to tell them where we go next." Taren stepped forward to the edge of the landing platform. He looked at the faces, the tired eyes that were finally bright with hope. "I am not your king." Taren's voice rang out, carried by the planet-wide broadcast system Sovar had restored. "A king takes, a sovereign gives. We have been given the tools to turn a desert into an Eden, but the tools are not the miracle. You are. The fact that you survived the dust, the hunger, and the blood is the proof that you are worthy of what the ancients left behind." He gestured to the sky, where the Aurelian sat like a golden needle among the stars. "Ravinar is just the beginning." Taren continued. "There are a dozen worlds on the rim currently choking in the dark, ruled by fear and scarcity. We have the knowledge. We have the strength. We will not expand to rule. We will expand to awaken." The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a sound louder than any dust storm Taren had ever heard. That night, as the celebrations began in the new cities of glass and stone, Taren returned to the deep silence of Sanctum 04. He stood in the central chamber, where he had first fallen as a broken boy. "Sover 9, Taren said softly. "I am here, Warden," the AI replied. Its holographic form seemed warmer now, its light more stable. The records say the sovereigns died out because they became too isolated. They kept the light for themselves until it went out. "That is a correct historical summary," the AI confirmed. "We won't make that mistake," Taren said. Looking at the star charts projected on the walls, thousands of points of light, each representing a world waiting for a chance to bloom. "We're going to share the fire." Calculations suggest a 92% probability of galactic destabilization if you proceed, Sover noted. Then, for the first time in its 12,000-year existence, the AI added a postscript that wasn't based on logic. "However, I find the remaining 8% of unpredictable hope to be a much more interesting variable." Taren smiled, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the light of the surface. Outside, Lyra was waiting. The new tribe was ready, and the stars were finally within reach. The boy who had fallen into a pit had become the man who would lead a galaxy out of the dirt. The frontier was no longer a place to die. It was a cradle. And thus, the story began. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.